Welcome, Jessica. Thank you so much for joining us on the Beyond Barriers podcast. We are thrilled to have you. You and I met, I would say, a few weeks ago, and it was just, we could have gone on forever and ever. And I thought, I have to have Jessica on the podcast. So here we are today. So excited and thrilled to have you. But more importantly, to talk about your journey and your story as to, what has your journey been like and how have you found yourself in the role you are now? And as a now, upcoming author as well. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Sure. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I agree. I could talk to you all the time. So this is wonderful. So I'm a university program head. I head the department of or the program of musical theater at East Carolina University. And my background is in theater. And I know, Monica, you have a background in performance as well. And I heard your last podcast guest as well was talking about being an actor. And I was like, oh, this is so wonderful. I think there are so many synergies, especially between speaking and the arts. So I've worked as a performer, as a vocal coach for actors and singers for like the last 2 decades. I teach voice, I teach vocal pedagogy, which is like the ins and outs of how the voice works and teaching voice. And about 3 years ago, I started taking that work and translating it from performers to women. And I started with the women in my life. And it was because I'm surrounded and very lucky to be surrounded by these brilliant, professional, educated women. And yet, what they were telling me and what we were finding is that they had been in school studying, whether it was medicine or law or education, whatever it might be, for years, sometimes decades. And yet, they could talk all day on their topic, but when it came time to have to address asking for something that they needed or having a difficult conversation or going from just the head of an organization to the talking head of an organization, they were struggling because though they had been in school for a long time, the commonality was no one teaches you these things.
Right.
And so and so I started out really with just the women in my inner circle. And that really got me to thinking that my unique skill set as a voice researcher and teacher and vocal coach, and then working with performers and performance anxiety and all of these things has a really unique take on, shall we say, public speaking. I don't really call it public speaking, on speaking up, right? And so I looked at the literature and there were a lot of books, really wonderful books on public speaking. There were also a lot of works on female empowerment and journaling and those really wonderful things. But what I didn't find was the crossover, was the how. And that's what I do, is coming in with the how to speak confidently and clearly, and then to combine that with that work to combat performance anxiety.
Oh my goodness. When I read, about your book and what you were talking about, and then there were just so many synergies that I thought this is so powerful, especially when most of the women that come through our Beyond Barriers Accelerator program, and we talk about, when we go into and start double clicking in the areas of courage or speaking up or, standing up and standing out, you hear the constant, of the sentences that start with like, I can't, or I'm not that type of speaker, or I'm not an extrovert, or I'll never be able to command a room like that. It was one of those things that your work was really speaking to it. And then for me, it resonated because I realized the idea of tapping into some of those things of your passion of also being like, a vocal teacher, a voice performance, the voice, thinking about how you kind of pull the power of your voice. I thought was so important for our listeners to hear about how this is another thing you can control, right? Because there are certain things we can't control. They're out of our control, and we can acknowledge them and know that they're there. But what are the things you can control? And I think voice and learning how to use it is something that we can control. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about, you touched on it, on getting the clarity
Mhm.
with the women around you, but really, how did you start to formulate and think about how powerful the voice could be? And what are some of the things that you teach, your friends from the very beginning when they come to you and they say, Jessica, like I'm having trouble, speaking up, or someone keeps disempowering me. How do I use my voice? What sparked that initial idea of I'm going to hone in on this?
Sure. I think the first thing is that the voice is something we all have, right? I like to say if the eyes are the window to the soul, the voice is its hype woman. So it's
Uh-huh.
your opening act, right? The
Right.
sound of your voice is always there. It's always the precursor to the words that you say, and we often don't think about. We spend a lot of time thinking about the words that we're going to say, the outfit we're going to wear, how we're going to stand, all of those things, but not as much time thinking about how we're going to sound when we say them. And I think that one of the reasons that is because there's just a lack of knowledge that that can be changed and that
Mm-hmm.
that can be improved. And that
Mm-hmm.
goes back to the idea that the voice itself is largely made up of skeletal muscle, which is the same kind of muscle that you work in the gym. And so it can be trained and it can be changed, and it actually works with the same exercise principles like frequency and intensity and specificity and all of those things that you would work any other muscle. They're just smaller and not as visible. And so we often don't think about them in that way. So I would say the three really important things for training the voice, preparing the voice to do its really best work. One is hydration. And we all know we need to be hydrated, right? It's important.
Mm-hmm.
But it takes 4 hours for the water that you drink to actually hydrate your voice. So it takes some time.
Wow.
So yes, so if you are, if you have a 9 o'clock presentation, or if you have an 8 o'clock call, or whatever it might be, getting up at 7:30, whenever it might be, and starting the water then isn't really going to help you. So
Mm.
that's the idea of just maintaining systemic hydration, because the voice itself doesn't have its own hydration or lubrication system. The
Mm-hmm.
other big one with hydration is that anything you swallow, if it's lozenges or teas, or in the singing world, we have these sprays like Entertainer's Secret and Throat Coat Tea, that's all great if it helps you, but it doesn't actually affect or touch your voice, because if it did, you would be choking, right? Because
Right.
the vocal folds sit, down in your windpipe, in your trachea. So the thing that does touch them is steam, and steam is it is like such a wonder drug, if
Mm-hmm.
you will, for the voice. And that could be as simple as taking a hot shower and leaving the bathroom door closed and just really breathing. It feels good and it's great for your voice. You could also, if you wanted to, make a small investment in a steamer, just like the Vicks steamer
Mm-hmm.
is the one that I have, and just use it without the menthol inserts. Steam is so excellent for the voice, particularly if you know you're going to be speaking and you're feeling under the weather, or you had a late night and you're tired. A voice teacher I know calls it the whiskey troll voice. If you wake up sounding like a whiskey troll, steam is really excellent for that. So steam, drinking water, and then the other thing to be really aware of is, because the voice is muscular, you need to warm it up the same way that you would do a little bit of a warm up before stretching or before doing strength training at the gym. And a really easy way to do that, and I will show you, and I'll say what I'm doing for the podcast, is to just grab a straw and to just
Mm.
hum through the straw, just just like little hills, kind of higher
Uh-huh.
and higher, just nice and easy. And it's like 2 minutes. You can do it in the shower, you can do it on your way to work, whatever it might be. And that exercise, which is called a semi-occluded vocal tract exercise, which you will not be quizzed on, my students are. What it is if you think of speaking or singing like sitting on a swing and having to pump your legs to get going, humming through the straw, or if you don't have a straw, just humming will work, is like someone giving you a push. So it's a
Mm.
really great way in the morning in particular to get your voice going for the day. So those would be the three big things: is drinking that water, using some steam, and then making sure that you're warming up at the beginning of the day.
That is fantastic. It's my new morning ritual,
There you
especially before
go.
having to do kind of speaking engagement. I love what you just shared, and it's so powerful. And, there are certain things in terms of, can you talk a little bit about, we have, individuals and even people on my team who, when it's, time for them to get up and speak about something, and maybe they're a little nervous, or the emotional and the quiver in their voice. Is there
Mhm.
something they can do for that? Like when you're nervous
Sure. Mhm.
and there's that quiver and you feel like, oh, if I come out quivering, or my voice sounds small, then it disempowers me and then I feel
Mhm.
even smaller. What would you suggest for that?
Right. Sure, absolutely. So, two things. The first one is going to be focusing on your breath. And I don't like to use the term belly breathing, because if the air is going into your belly, you need to turn off this podcast and go to the ER immediately. Um, but that idea of allowing your abdominal muscles to not be held in rigidly, and that could be by your own strength or also by tight shapewear, by clothing
Mm,
that women often wear when we present. And
mhm,
so what happens is, when you constrict the abdominal cavity in that way, it restricts the movement of our muscle called the diaphragm, and you've probably heard of
mhm,
diaphragmatic breathing. So the diaphragm is the vacuum that sucks air into the lungs. And in order for it to fully contract, it has to go down into your abdominal area. And then the idea of belly breathing is that your guts, your viscera, have to go somewhere. So they go out. And that's
right.
how you
Mhm,
naturally breathe, right? That's a full breath. However, when we constrict, whether it be because we're trying to suck it in or we're wearing really tight shapewear, that
mhm,
diaphragm cannot fully contract. And so instead, what happens is that we basically live in a state of hyperventilation. And that does two things to our voice. One, the quiver that you often feel in the voice is usually from a lack of energy, and energy
mm,
in the voice is all about the breath. It's all about, I had a teacher in grad school who said that the breath should both relax the body and energize the voice. And I think he was saying at the time that mine did neither, but that I've always really liked. I've gotten much better. I've gotten much better since then, but I've always really liked that sentiment. And
mhm,
so that will really help with that quiver. The other thing that being aware of the rigidity of your abdominal cavity does is that the nerve endings that activate our fight or flight response, that nervous
mhm,
anxiety
right.
response, live at the top of our lungs. And the nerve
Mm.
endings that activate the rest and digest response are at the bottom of the lungs. So those shallow breaths are actually activating your stress response. So
Mhm.
you're actually making yourself more nervous when you're restricting the ability of your abdomen to move.
Wow, that's fascinating. And I never thought about that. And even me, as like a vocal performance person,
Mhm.
when you rehearse, you're like relaxed, you're in there, and then you go get dressed and you put on the shapewear and you put on all this
Mhm.
other stuff, and you don't realize
Mhm.
what you're doing is making it harder for you when you go perform in
Mhm.
that moment, against all the
Absolutely.
nerves and all of that, the adrenaline you have pumping, which might be helpful, but still, I never thought in my mind when you were saying that, I was like, never again am I going to wear shapewear when I
Right?
go perform again,
Yes.
because it's just
Yes.
like it's making it harder.
Yes. Just take up space. That is,
Yes. Oh my goodness.
in every
That
way. In
was an
every
aha
way.
moment for myself. Thank you for that.
Hmm.
So talking a little bit about, and I want to hear more about you in terms of,
Hmm.
as you're now also pivoting, right? You're an amazing, professor, instructor of, performer, creative. But at the same time, we always still have those bouts of those moments of self-doubt or stage
Hmm.
fright, right? When you're
Mm.
overcoming some of those fears, walking out onto the stage.
Hmm.
What techniques have helped you overcome any of those kind of moments of self-doubt, limiting beliefs, or that stage fright when you're about to go out there?
Sure, absolutely. I know for myself, and I think one of the things that is so important is doing it. Even and if I have an audition or if I have a talk or something coming up, I
Hmm.
really, and I recommend that all women do this, try to prepare in as most realistic of a way that you can, because
Mm,
oftentimes what is scary is the unknown. It's the what if. What if
right.
I'm late? What if, no one listens to me? What if someone asks me a question that's so out of left field that I either don't know the answer or I can't get back on track, right?
Hmm.
And so we often start to spiral and kind of ruminate on those what ifs. And the reality is that you can prepare for them. So I highly recommend working with a partner. And if it's a presentation, great, have them sit in front of you, have them have a notepad or
Hmm.
have their cell phone go off, have them get up and leave. Practice having them ask you something that has nothing to do with your talk so that you can practice maintaining that focus and coming back to it. And you might go so far also if you're someone who deals with like shaking legs or that racing heart, things like that.
Hmm.
With if you're worried about being late, great, walk around your house for 10 minutes fast, like you don't know where you're going, and then practice your talk. Or if you want to do a little leg workout in addition, do a wall sit for a minute,
Right.
and activate those muscles, raise that heart rate, and then give your talk. So what you're really doing is trying to prepare to take away the what if, that we prepare for what might happen because
Hmm.
we don't know what will happen, right? But it's
Hmm.
it's far less scary when you feel like you're prepared for it. The other thing that I do is I try to turn that nervous energy, and I'm seeing myself sitting in a holding room right now going, is it my turn yet? Oh no, there's four people and then me, into like, is it my turn yet? Like, let's
Yeah.
go. Like, when is it
Yeah.
going to be me? When is it my turn? And trying to take charge of the situation as opposed to letting it sort of take charge of me. And then I think the biggest thing is I remind myself and my clients and my students of this all the time. Usually, this is something you enjoy talking about, right? This is
Right.
something most of the time you've chosen to do this, right?
Right.
You've chosen to speak on this topic or to present or to interview for this job or to sing this song or whatever it might be. And so just reminding yourself that, like, okay, this is something I like. This is good for me. Goes a really long way in terms of helping to quiet
Mm.
those nerves as well.
Those are so powerful. And I love the real time. I love the idea of like running around and getting your heart rate up. And in those
Mhm.
moments where you do feel your heart racing and you've got to speak, but then kind of being able to talk through it already. And it's just one of those kind of reminders of, I've done this before, right? Just different
Mhm.
situation. My heart is beating out of my chest, but I'm
Mhm.
still able to perform. Those
Mhm.
are some really great tangible things. And I'm sure that my wife in the future is going to wonder why I'm running around the house before I'm
Yes. Yeah.
performing. And it's like, I'm
Mhm.
practicing. But those are really, really easy, tangible things to do. I loved that. Can you talk a little bit about when you maybe have overcome, like you've had that moment of failure or a
Mhm.
setback where
Mhm.
I'm thinking that someone starts off their presentation and they had a really good hook or they had something they were
Mhm.
going to say and they fumbled it, or you get
Mhm.
out on stage and you're kind of slightly sharp or like you didn't quite hit the
Yeah.
note.
Uh-huh.
What are some tips that helped you overcome those situations to, like, make sure that you just somehow re-empower yourself? What have you done in those situations?
Absolutely. The number one tool that I use and that I give clients is your breath. So if you think of taking a pause or taking a breath, that is the ultimate opportunity to reset,
Mm,
right?
yes.
So you can use that, and it's okay to pause. That's the other thing is I used to get so excited when I first started teaching and when I would first start working with clients that they would do whatever it was they were doing for me, and then I'd be like, here are 25 things that we can do right now that's going to help you. And it was so overwhelming and I was talking so fast. And
Mm-hmm.
um, using that breath is that moment to just recenter, reassess, and take a beat to get back on track. I think that is so incredibly important. I
Yes.
think the other thing to remember is that, shit happens. Like life
Yeah.
is, it's real, and it happens to everybody. The people at the very upper echelon down to beginners, we all make mistakes. And I think oftentimes, like, just taking a beat or even addressing it in a humorous way and then moving on really gets your audience on your side. And the other thing I would say is that 9 times out of 10, you're probably the only person who knows that you screwed up. And so I have students and clients who will give some sort of a tell. One of the big
Mhm.
ones I see is if something isn't going right with their voice, they'll kind of like grab their throat or like, put their hand there as if they're gonna,
Mhm.
I don't know, get in there or something and change it.
Yes.
And I say, you might as well have put a spotlight on you that says I screwed up, that says
Mm.
something didn't go the way that I wanted it to, right? Whereas if you hadn't, most of the time, nobody is going to know because
Mhm.
no one usually knows the order of your speech except for you, right? Nobody
Yes,
knows if you
yes.
were. I was at a concert once, and I remember I sang, and I wouldn't recommend this, but I sang, the first verse, and I kind of got off, and I was like, okay, let's just go to the third verse. Okay, let's bring it back, And I think
Uh-huh.
that's it's really important to give yourself some grace also, and just remember that you are human. Everybody gets it. Everybody has been there, and most of the time, you can just take a beat and then proceed.
Yes. I think it's so powerful how the breath really does. It gives you, it's kind of two, three-pronged approach, right? It gives you that moment to kind of reset. It, like you
Mm-hmm.
said, energizes your voice, and it
Mm-hmm.
also gives you that split second for you to think about like the next step, what's next, or
Yes.
how do
Mm-hmm.
I recover?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's extremely powerful, but and we don't realize how much just 2 seconds doesn't sound like a long time, but is a long time in those moments. And just being able to
Mm-hmm.
like pause, take that breath, and move forward
Mm-hmm.
in that moment. I love it. I want to shift gears just a little bit because you
Mm-hmm.
also are someone who, you work in higher education. It can
Mm-hmm.
be a very challenging environment. And, you are teaching us all of these great things about, the power of the voice and all of that, but also your own career success in an industry where it can, in higher education can be almost daunting as well, right? Because you're working with lots of
Mm-hmm.
experienced, educated, intellectual people.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about that and how you have leveraged that environment to continue to be successful. How do you stay ahead? Like, because
Mm-hmm.
there's, learning is kind of this powerful tool, but you can never know everything. So talk a little
Mm-hmm.
bit about um, your habits in order to stay successful and stay ahead of the game and be one of these, instructors, teachers, thought leaders who is not kind of getting left behind. What do you do in that
Sure.
space?
Sure. So I would say the first thing is, yeah, higher ed, I think, like the corporate world, can be really intimidating. And I think one of the things that I have to really remind myself and that I often share with my clients is you have to know what you're good at. And I think I remember being in college, I was a senior in undergrad, so many moons ago,
Mhm.
and my instructor sat us all down, our senior class, and said, okay, we're going to go around. I want you to tell me what you're good at. And we all looked at each other like, what? Because I honestly don't think anybody had ever asked me that before. I mean, I was
Mhm.
22 and I don't know that I'd ever really given that any thought. And as a performer, we are constantly told what we need to work on. We're
Right.
I mean, it is process oriented, it is feedback oriented. And so you don't really get asked, like, what are you good at? And I think also as women, there's this stigma around tooting your own horn or this idea that
Yes.
we shouldn't be boastful or we shouldn't be, which is just such bullshit. And I think that
Yes.
for me, I know what I'm good at, right? I know, and I know those things also, and this goes in tandem because I've put the time in to become good at them. And that's a big piece of it is I love learning. I love the voice. I have sought out mentors. That's such a big one, is no one is going to ring your doorbell and say, hey, I'd like to mentor you. I'd like to champion you. I think,
Hmm.
you might be good at this. It's reaching out. And so I've just continuously done that, whether it's because I'm reading a book and then I find the author on LinkedIn, or whatever it might be, of saying, hey, here's my elevator pitch. Here's what I'm doing. I love what you're doing. I would love to learn more about it. And just being very proactive in
Hmm.
terms of connecting myself with people whose careers I would like to have, basically,
Hmm.
with people whose path I would like to take. So I think that is incredibly important. Uh, I talk about in my book what I call the American Idol effect. And I
Mm.
remember when American Idol started, um, people were just lined up. I mean, they still are, but it was so new, and everyone thought they were a singer. It was like, my great aunt Nancy told me, that I'm a great singer,
Yes.
and so I'm gonna be the next Adele, basically. And they were so bad most of the time. And I think that singing, and this is just, it's my world, but it's a metaphor for anything that you become excellent at, is when you're really good at it, you make it look easy. And I say to my students, wouldn't it be great, if you could sing from the bottom of your range to the very top and make no adjustments, and everything would just be smooth and everything would just sound good? And they laugh. And it's because that's ridiculous. Like,
Right.
it's constantly making adjustments to make it look like you're not, like it's easy. And that's everything, right? If
Mhm.
somebody is really good at something, it's because they've put in so much time to be good
Yes.
at it. And I think
Hmm.
that's something, particularly in today's age of like now, that often gets overlooked, is that yes, it's knowing what you're good at, but it's also, you got to put in the work to have the knowledge. You have to try things to have the
Hmm.
skills, and really, really putting in the time and effort behind whatever it is to get yourself where you want to go.
Mm. That is so powerful that you said that. And I think it's so important because there are many times when something comes naturally to you, like
Hmm.
you, or, people will say, oh, you're a natural born singer. But if you start to believe that and then you don't practice and put in the work, then there's
Hmm.
limitations to where you can go. And
Hmm.
then as soon as you get that negative feedback, or you don't perform the way you thought you were going to perform, you almost kind of just quit, because it's like, if I have to put effort into it, it's no longer natural,
Absolutely.
right? It's no longer, I'm not good at it.
Yes, absolutely. It's the same idea of telling a child they're smart.
Yes.
If you tell a child they're smart, that's great until they come up against something that isn't easy. And then what, are they dumb because they had
Yeah,
to work harder at it?
exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Yes.
Hmm.
No, I love that. And so I constantly am talking about reframing this idea of constantly learning, that learning is the new superpower. And
Mm.
that the more you're curious and the more that you learn, the stronger that you will get.
Hmm.
But this whole idea of everybody, all of us, really look at your strengths and where can you see yourself as a really amazing athlete, but then you need the coach and the practice to become the
Hmm.
Olympian, right?
Right.
So you can be
Hmm.
really good at something, but you've got to practice over and over to do
Hmm.
that, which I think is so powerful that you said that, in terms of, constantly focusing on what you're good at, but then honing that strength
Hmm.
over
Exactly.
and over to do it, I
Hmm.
think is so, so powerful. And I love that you talked about seeking out mentors, and you even kind of took it a bit further where you said even champions, the advocates, the sponsors.
Hmm.
Could you talk a little bit about how you build those strategic relationships, like when you are sitting there thinking
Hmm.
about what next, what's going to help you? How do you develop that? You mentioned, like, in some cases you find the author, reach out to them on LinkedIn, but are there other techniques that you use to build those relationships?
Sure. So I think the first thing is, don't burn bridges ever. I think that's
Mm.
something that I push on my students so hard, because whatever industry you're in, it is a
Hmm.
much smaller world than you think it is. And
Yes.
I like to say that talent will get you through a door, it will get you hired, but hard work and kindness and all of those things are what are going to get you rehired. It's what's going to get you, you know, to be someone that people want to work with
Mm-hmm.
again and again. And I would say, because I've seen clients, particularly women, deal with this. So I have a wonderful client who's out in Los Angeles, and she's a singer-songwriter. And we were chatting one day, and she's been doing, the open mic circuit and smaller shows, and just really trying to get her work seen by the right people, shall we
Mm-hmm.
say. And she shared with me that she has a family friend who is a record exec, and that he wanted to look at her songs. And I was like, well, why haven't you given them to him? And
Yeah.
she was like, well, I don't know, that would be cheating. Or I feel like, I don't want him to judge me, or I don't want other people to judge me, because I got where I am because of my connections. That's so ridiculous.
Yes.
So it, if you are lucky enough, if you are blessed enough to have some sort of access or to have some sort of privilege in an area, I feel like it is your responsibility to use that. But that only gets you so far. So that might get you a phone call. It might open that door. You still have to get yourself through the door,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
I talk in my book about Nora Jones, and that I don't think Nora Jones sold the millions of records that she did because her father was a famous sitar player. I
Mm-hmm.
think she sold the records because she's a killer singer songwriter, right?
Exactly.
And so I think if you are someone who's fortunate enough to have that access, or work your network and find that access, and then be very prepared when that opportunity arises to take advantage of it, and then to help those behind you who also need access.
That's such insightful perspective, because there are lots of women who don't leverage their network in the same way
Mm-hmm.
that our male peers do, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's the good old boys network, and they don't hesitate to pick up the phone and call
Mm-hmm.
and say, hey, help me
Right.
get this job, or
Mm-hmm.
help me get this deal, or help me connect me to so and so. They don't think twice, but like you said, we are sometimes opting out for ourselves. We're getting in our own way because
Mm-hmm.
of this thought of, oh, that's cheating, or they're going to think less of me, or I'm going to be a burden, or I don't want them to feel like I'm using them. And so I loved how you reframed it in terms of it's almost an obligation.
Mm-hmm.
And, even reframing this idea of when you reach out to someone and ask for their help, you are giving them an opportunity to feel significant and
Mm-hmm.
to contribute to your
Mm-hmm.
success, and they'll be proud of that. And so you're giving them an opportunity, to help and feel like they
Mm-hmm.
are worthy, right? And so they
Mm-hmm.
have something to give.
Absolutely.
So I
Mm-hmm.
loved the way that you reframed that, and how it's almost an obligation that if you have that privilege or connection,
Mm-hmm.
use it. Don't let it go to waste, because then, we all lose out, right? So,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
oh my goodness. Well, I could talk on to you with you forever on all of these topics, but I know we have to close. So I'm going to jump to the lightning round questions, which are my favorite, because it does kind of sometimes give us a glimmer of another side of you, or really kind of what helps shape you. So first question is, what book has greatly influenced you?
Sure. So my dad is an author and a researcher in education. My parents are both professors, so I went into the family business. And his latest book is called The New Science of Learning, and it
Mm.
has changed me as a teacher, as a speaker, as a researcher. It really goes into the brain science behind how we learn, and that you can actually do it faster and make it last longer if you just tap into those things. So that's been a really big one for me.
Wow. Okay, Jessica, that is on the top of my list, because that's what we're
Yes.
focusing on right now here at Beyond Barriers, in terms of helping
Mm-hmm.
people learn faster. I mean, we're all about
Mm-hmm.
go further, faster, but
Mm-hmm.
the new superpower is learning. And how do you
Mm-hmm.
do that faster and make
Mm-hmm.
it last? So believe me, I will be running to the bookstore or running to Amazon
Wonderful.
and buying that. Next question. What is your favorite inspiring quote or saying?
Sure. So I have two. One is a Stephen Sondheim lyric from his show Into the Woods. And I say this to my students, it's the witch, and she says, I'm not good, I'm not nice, I'm just right. But I don't usually use that one because it's kind of bad for business. But
Uh-huh.
I do like it. And then the other one is when opportunity knocks, answer the door, even if you're in your bathrobe. And that's Dolly Parton. I've always loved that.
I love that one.
Hmm.
What is one word or moniker that you would use to describe yourself?
Sure. It's appassionato, which is a music term that means with passion. And
I love it.
it's my favorite word, and I think it really sums me up.
Absolutely does. What is one change, a habit, a behavior, an action that you implemented that made your life better?
Getting up early, for sure. When I owned a vocal studio and I worked in the afternoons and the evenings, I was more of a night owl, and because I had the luxury of sleeping in. And now that I have two young children and a full-time job, when I was writing my book, I wrote most of it from 5 to 7 in the morning, and I've maintained that habit because I really enjoy having that time.
I love that. That is a really amazing thing, especially when you have like a chronotype where you might be a night owl, but
Hmm.
shifting that sometimes will unlock some
Hmm.
power. And like you said, moments that you're like, this is better. I need to do it. And here's my favorite, and I'm sure you had a really hard time figuring this one out.
We did.
But here's Jessica walking out on stage about to
Hmm.
perform or speak or whatever to thousands of people in the audience. What is that power song you want playing as you walk out on stage?
It's Roar, Katy Perry's
Yes.
Roar, I think is what it is. And I had to really give that some thought, but I love that song. And yeah, I could definitely see myself walking out to that one.
Oh, I love it. It's going to certainly round out our Beyond Barriers playlist for sure. Um, And I know that we're going to get this, and I'm sure with all of the amazing tips and insights that you shared on your podcast, there are going to be many of our listeners wanting to figure out how to stay in contact with you. But more importantly, you do have a book coming out in October, which I think is going to be phenomenal in terms of I Am Speaking. And I love the
Hmm.
title. But I Am Speaking, but talking about how to find your voice and use your voice. Can you talk a little bit about that? How can people get it? Because I know it's not coming out until
Hmm.
October, but what's the best way for them to get it now, like reserve, a pre-order copy?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it is available. I'm Speaking, Every Woman's Guide to Finding Your Voice and Using It Fearlessly. And it is available for pre-sale on most platforms. So Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Walmart, all the places. I also have it linked on my website, which is just my name, Jessica Doyle-Mekkes, MEKKES.com. And yes, pre-sales are so important. So if it is something that
Mm.
strikes your fancy, please check it out. And I'm going to be doing some really fun talkbacks for those who have purchased from the pre-sale,
Mhm.
and when October rolls around.
Phenomenal. So we will certainly be there, and we will figure out one way or another how we get you engaged here with Beyond Barriers and speak with our community, because I think voice, the whole idea around voice and confidence and making sure that they feel heard is something that always keeps them up at night. And I think it would be something that they would definitely welcome. But I'm excited for your book to come out. I did get a sneak peek. Thank you very much. And I think it's going to be phenomenal. So more to come. And I look forward to staying connected, Jessica, and good luck. And thank you again for, granting us this time with you and all of the teaching and the sharing that you did.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.